The following is this series of 3 videos concerning the question of determinism and free will. I have to note at the outset that I had to stop at 3 videos because I find that I can't finish it in 3 videos, but I had to stop somewhere. So the first video will be on determinism, the second on free will, and the third is a further exposition of free will. And it'll have to stop there, but I will address the question more in later videos. So, this first video here is on determinism. 1. Determinism with respect to the question of human free will is the following position. All human choices are events necessitated by prior events. Since events that are necessitated are determined, and thus not free, human choices are determined and not free. 2. Free will with respect to the same question is the following position. Human beings are themselves causal agents of a unique kind of the universe, namely in that the human mind can deliberate upon different courses of action and is able to choose among them without coercion from previous chain of causality. While there are certainly many factors that can mitigate or in some cases remove the powers of choice, man has this faculty in general. There are various ways in which the argument for determinism and against freedom can be made. I'll read you a quote from philosopher Colin Madigan, who explains this position very nicely. After that, we'll look at the argument as it is formulated syllogistically in various attempts to respond to it. Colin Madigan says, quote, "The argument is exceedingly familiar, and runs as follows. Either determinism is true or it is not. If it is true, then all our actions are uniquely necessitated by prior states of the world, just like every other event, but that it cannot be the case that we could have acted otherwise, since this would require a possibility determinism rules out. Once the initial conditions are set and the laws fixed, causality excludes genuine freedom. On the other hand, if indeterminism is true, then though things could have happened otherwise, it is not the case that we could have chosen otherwise, since a merely random event is no kind of free choice. That some events occur causelessly, or are not subject to law, or only to probabilistic law, is not sufficient for those events to be free choices. Thus, one horn of the dilemma represents choices as predetermined happenings in a predictable causal sequence, while the other construes them as inexplicable lurches to which the universe is randomly prone. Neither alternative supplies what the notion of free will requires, and no other alternative suggests itself. Therefore, freedom is not possible in any kind of possible world. The concept contains the seeds of its own destruction. Problems in Philosophy, the Limits of Inquiry. Page 80. The argument that Madigan makes here can be formulated thus. Premise 1. Every action is an event necessitated by prior events. Premise 2. The events we call free choices are actions. Conclusion. The events we call choices are necessitated by prior events. Or the events we call free choices are necessitated by prior events, rather. As Madigan notes in his description, quantum indeterminacy is no escape, since random events which occur for no reason whatsoever are not sufficient to establish what I defined above as free will. The following thought experiment illustrates this fact. Suppose a mad quantum physicist sets up an experiment in which an enormous sequoia tree is made to perch precariously over a house in which a mother, father, and 2 children are sleeping. He rigs the tree to an apparatus that connects to a device inside of which is a single radioactive particle. This particle has a 50% chance of decaying and a 50% chance of not decaying within the next 24 hours. If it does not decay, the tree will stay right where it is, and all will be well. If it does decay, this will set about a chain reaction that leads to the sequoia being dropped on the house, killing everyone inside. Now suppose the particle does decay and the family is killed. When the police come around and find the family dead and the scientist's quantum Goldberg machine, they arrest the scientist. During the questioning, he admits that he set up the machine, but blames the outcome on the particle. "It was freer to decay or not to decay," he exclaims. "Let me go. Arrest that particle." I think at this point the police would scoff, because the particle's action, random or not, could no more be worthy of blame for killing of the family than it could be praised had it not decayed. It will be the scientist, not the particle, who is charged with murder on the assumption that he knew what he was doing, and also knew that he should have done otherwise, and also that he could have done otherwise. Random events aren't free in the sense that free will is said to be free. They are just arbitrary. Another attempt to answer the determinist challenge comes from compatibilism. Compatibilists accept the logic of the determinist argument, but claims that even so, a more modest form of free will can be defended. It accomplishes this by differentiating between different senses of cause and freedom. The compatibilist first points out that a person has various aims and goals that he wishes to accomplish. In short, he has wants that he can act upon, if nothing stops him from doing so. and he will act on his wants if not stopped. However, it is also possible for an outside force to interfere with his action coercively. For example, a man chooses to play golf, which choice is, admittedly, the consequence of a series of antecedent causes. If nothing and no one prevents him from playing golf, then he was, quote, free to play golf. However, suppose he wanted to read instead of play golf, and someone physically forced him to play golf. Now he was coerced, and so he could not act according to his wants. In that case, his choice to read was frustrated. But the latter situation is obviously not the same as the former, so there is a sense in which he is more unfree after being coerced than before. As long as we agree to a much more modest definition of free will, says the compatibilist, we could still have free will of a sort. Well, compatibilism, at least in this form, does not seem to work. The compatibilist already concedes that the man's initial goals were the product of a causal series, and were therefore forced upon him. He did not choose to play golf in the first case, or read in the second case. He had no real choice in the matter. For this reason, when he was coerced into playing golf in the second case, it was simply a matter of one causal series interfering with another causal series. This state of affairs is in principle no different from the following. The 9 ball is rolling up down a pool table towards the corner pocket, when it is struck by the 6th ball and diverted from its original course. Was its former state any freer than the latter state? It seems obvious that the answer is no. As in the case of indeterminism, compatibilism won't get you anywhere close to free will as defined above. At best it can help delineate between different levels of causal determinism, and I imagine its methods might help illuminate the area of animal choice, quote-unquote, which is relatively predictable and instinctive, is not intellective and thus is not free will, but which is also more complex than billiard balls. So I don't think compatibilism is useless, I just don't think it can give an adequate response to determinism. Having reviewed the argument for determinism and having briefly reviewed 2 unsuccessful attempts to respond to it, I want to look at another issue that is extremely important. Determinism is a claim about a state of affairs that must obtain in any possible world. But the fact of determinism, and we'll assume for now that it is a fact, is not the same as an explanation for the experience of free will. Determinists concede that we human beings have an experience of freedom of choice. The idea that men are free to choose is not so much a belief that we hold, as it is a basic experience of reality, which must nevertheless be some kind of an illusion. Listen to any song in your library, read any novel, watch any play, do almost anything, and you will encounter over and over again this universal experience of freedom to choose. The logic of every drama presupposes it. The drama of the courtroom presupposes the freedom of the defendants. Anywhere where humans are acting or speaking about acting, they testify to this universal belief, both implicitly and explicitly. However, freedom of will is metaphysically impossible, as Dr. Madigan illustrates, and so must be an illusion. It therefore behooves the determinist to try to explain why it is that we think we're free. The 2 main explanations put forward for free will are as follows. 1. Finitude of belief, or the argument from ignorance. We think we are free because we simply aren't privy to all of the causes that act upon us. Just as a person from the ancient world held a false belief that the earth is standing still because it did not have the necessary perspective to see that it is moving, we seem to deliberate and choose between possible actions, whereas in reality, whatever action we do end up taking is the only action we could have taken. Because we are ignorant of the total causal forces at work on us, we just don't see that we had to do whatever it is that we did. The second explanation is different, but could be made to work in tandem with the first. The illusion of free will as an evolutionary adaptation. Obviously, it's beneficial for us to believe that we have free will, because in so believing we can do so many wonderful things like have causes and goals, drama, the experience of accomplishment, law, and the notion of responsibility that go along with it, etc. Evidently, such things are helpful to our species' survival and reproduction, and since evolution tends to favor qualities, such as the illusion of free will, that are conducive to survival, this illusion is exactly the sort of thing that evolution would tend to produce and preserve. Well, now we've seen the argument for determinism and the futility of the standard arguments against it. It seems that despite all our human pretensions about liberty and personal responsibility, the cultivation of virtue and of personal achievement, and the like, we are operating under a great delusion. It is no use asking what we should have done or what we ought to do. It is no use praising or blaming any action. It is no more meaningful to do that than to praise a boulder for rolling down a cliff. We do what we have to do and what we cannot avoid doing, and there is no other possible way for things to be. We are but the most complicated parts of a very elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, and we cannot be otherwise. Or can't we?